The courtroom was packed. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, cameras clicking like hungry birds. The air was tense. No one whispered. No one moved. Everyone was waiting for him. Then the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Senator Grant walked in, wearing a sharp gray suit and an arrogant grin. His lawyers followed close behind, carrying files and smug looks. Grant didn't just walk, he strutted, as if the courtroom belonged to him. As if this trial was just a show for the cameras. He turned to the press gallery and gave a quick smirk. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. People whispered his name. That's him. The man on the news. He's going to win. Watch. He waved at someone in the back row. A few laughed. He liked attention, and he knew how to steal it. But across the room, sitting at the high wooden bench, was someone who didn't smile. Judge Amara Fields. She sat tall in her black robe, eyes focused, face calm. She had the kind of silence that made the room colder. Not because she was angry, but because she saw everything. Amara had been a judge for nearly 12 years. She had handled murder trials, political scandals, and broken families. But this case was different. This wasn't about the law alone. This was about power, about truth. She watched Grant approach the defense table. He didn't look at her, not really. Just a quick glance, like she wasn't important, like she was just part of the furniture. When the clerk asked everyone to rise, they stood. Amara's voice was steady. This court is now in session. People sat again. The room held its breath. Before she could even begin, Grant leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and said loudly, "Let's try to get this over with. I've got real work to do." The audience chuckled nervously. His lawyers didn't stop him. They looked proud. Judge Amara didn't respond. She looked at her notes, calm as ever. She started reading the case summary. Her voice was smooth, low, clear. But just as she spoke the words, "Evidence will be presented," she was cut off. Grant laughed out loud. It wasn't a small laugh. It was full of mockery, loud enough for the mics to catch. He leaned forward, raised an eyebrow, and said with a smirk, "What does someone like you know about justice anyway?" The room froze. Gasps were heard. Some reporters lowered their cameras in shock. Even his own lawyer turned pale. There was something sharp in those words, something hateful. He wasn't just mocking her experience, he was mocking her, her race, her gender, her very presence on that bench. He looked around like he'd just made a clever joke. No one laughed. Judge Amara didn't move. She didn't blink. She just stared at him, the way a mountain watches a storm, unshaken. Her silence filled the room like thunder. Not a word. She placed her papers down, folded her hands, and looked at Grant for a long moment. He shifted in his seat. Reporters glanced at each other. A young woman in the front row whispered, "Did he really just say that?" A clerk dropped her pen. But still, Amara said nothing. Her calm scared him more than any words could. She pressed a button near her mic. "Defense will refrain from personal attacks," she said, her voice flat. "This is a court of law, not a stage." Grant tried to laugh again, but it didn't land this time. His voice cracked slightly. "Just saying what everyone's thinking," he muttered. But no one agreed. His lawyers looked down. The crowd looked away. And Judge Amara just stared, not with anger, not with pride, with power. Not the kind of power that yells and screams, the kind that waits, the kind that knows. She picked up her gavel and tapped it once. "Let's begin," she said. And in that moment, something changed in the room. The air felt heavy. The press leaned forward. Something was coming, something big. They could feel it. They didn't know her past. They didn't know what she had survived. They didn't know the years of study, the nights without sleep, the battles she fought to sit in that chair. But they would. They would know everything soon. The courtroom was still buzzing from what had just happened. Senator Grant had insulted the judge, and not just her role. He insulted her identity, her worth, in front of the whole courtroom, in front of the cameras. But Judge Amara Fields hadn't reacted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just looked at him. And that silence, it was louder than anything she could have said. Grant leaned back again, but this time, he didn't look so confident. He noticed the courtroom had changed. People weren't smiling at him anymore. His joke hadn't landed. And Judge Amara, she hadn't moved at all. She started again, her voice calm and controlled. This case is about misuse of public funds, bribery, and witness intimidation, she said, reading slowly. But Grant was fidgeting now. He glanced at his lawyers. They nodded at him to stay quiet, but his ego wouldn't let him. "I'm being treated like a criminal for helping my people," he said loudly. "Let's be honest, Judge. This is just politics, isn't it?" Judge Amara looked up again. No emotion. "Mr. Grant," she said, "this court doesn't run on opinion, it runs on facts. You'll have your chance to speak, but not now." Her voice was firm, not angry, just steady, controlled. Grant laughed again, trying to shake off the tension. But even he felt it, that cold stare, that silence. It was like she was waiting for something he didn't see yet. Across the courtroom, a young woman named Tasha, a local law student, sat in the back row. She had followed Judge Amara's career since high school. To her, Judge Fields wasn't just a judge, she was a hero. "She's not saying much," Tasha whispered to the person next to her, "but he has no idea who she is." Judge Amara turned the page in her file. She began calling the first witness. A man named Robert King, a government worker, walked up to the stand. His hands shook. He had been afraid to testify. He'd been threatened before. And everyone knew. "Who threatened him? Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. Robert nodded. "Yes." Amara gave him a soft nod. "Just one, quiet, strong." "Go ahead, Mr. King," she said. Robert swallowed. Then he spoke, and his words dropped like bombs. "I saw Senator Grant take money from a private company. Then he told us to approve their project, even though it was dangerous." Murmurs swept through the courtroom. Grant jumped up. "Lies! He's making that up!" Amara didn't blink. "Sit down, Mr. Grant," she said, calm as ever. "You'll speak when it's your turn." Grant sat, red in the face. Robert continued. "He told me if I spoke out, I'd lose my job. I got letters, threats." Judge Amara leaned forward slightly. "Did you keep those letters?" Robert nodded. "Yes, I sent copies to the federal investigators, and to this court." Gasps echoed. Judge Amara didn't move. "Thank you, Mr. King," she said. "You may step down." The next witness was called, then another, and another. One after the other, they gave the same kind of story. Money, threats, secrets, power. Grant was getting pale. His lawyers were whispering furiously. Cameras zoomed in on his face. Sweat showed on his forehead. He looked across the room at Judge Amara again. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't looked angry or proud, just steady, unshaken, watching everything. And suddenly, Grant realized something. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was letting him punish himself. Every time he opened his mouth, he made things worse. Every witness pulled another brick from the wall he had built around himself. The silence he had once mocked was now crushing him. Back in the press section, a reporter typed quickly. "Senator Grant tries to dominate courtroom but is quietly dismantled by Judge Fields' calm power." Even the jury was watching Judge Amara now, not Grant. He shifted in his chair again. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. And Judge Amara. She just wrote one more line in her notebook, then looked up, straight at him. Judge Amara. Fields looked calm on the outside, but inside her mind, she wasn't in the courtroom anymore. She was back in the small town where she grew up. The courtroom faded, and memories rushed in like a flood. Back then, she was just Amara, a quiet girl with big dreams and a strong mother. Her mother cleaned offices at night. Her father was gone. People in their neighborhood worked hard. But no one had power. One day, when Amara was just 12, she saw something that changed her life forever. She had gone with her mom to the courthouse where her mother cleaned floors. Amara sat in the back, reading a book. While court was still going, she saw a judge, a white man in his 60s, shout at a poor black woman who didn't have a lawyer. The woman tried to explain, but the judge didn't care. Case dismissed. "You wasted this court's time," the judge barked. The woman cried. Amara never forgot that sound. That day, little Amara made a promise. "One day, I'll sit in that chair, and I'll listen. I'll bring fairness." Back in the present, Senator Grant shifted uncomfortably as another witness gave damaging evidence. His voice was no longer loud, his arrogance fading fast. But Judge Amara hadn't said much. Still calm. Still steady. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was control. Suddenly, a commotion stirred in the press row. Someone whispered, "Did you know she used to represent wrongfully convicted inmates for free before she became a judge?" Another replied, "She got 3 people off death row, all innocent." A third voice added, "Grant's team didn't even research her background properly." The courtroom was realizing something. Amara Fields wasn't just a judge. She was a fighter, a storm in disguise. Court paused for a short break. Grant's lawyer whispered, "We need to settle. She's killing us quietly." But Grant refused. "No, she's just playing a role. I've seen people like her before." The lawyer looked worried. "No, sir, you haven't." During the break, Amara stepped into her chambers. Alone, on the wall was a photo of her mother. Amara touched the frame gently. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They still try to silence us, Mama. But I'm not that little girl anymore." She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her robe. Her bench. Her courtroom. This was her ground now. Back in the courtroom, the break ended. Judge Amara returned and called the session to order. But then, something happened. One last witness walked in. A surprise witness. Detective Lorna Banks. An older black woman. With years of experience and no patience for lies. Grant's face changed the moment he saw her. He tried to stand. "I object to this witness." But Judge Amara raised her hand. "Mr. Grant, sit down." Her voice was colder now. Sharper. Everyone turned to watch. Detective Banks took the stand. "I've been investigating corruption tied to this case for 6 years, she said. She pulled out a file, thick, heavy. "I have phone records, bank transfers, and statements that point directly to the defendant, Senator Grant, as the one behind the cover-up." The courtroom gasped. Judge Amara leaned forward. Just a little, but that look in her eyes, it wasn't silent anymore. It was fire. Grant tried to protest, but his voice cracked. For the first time, he looked small. Tasha, the young law student, in the back whispered, "This isn't just a trial, this is a lesson. She's showing the whole world how power is really used." Judge Amara closed her notebook slowly, then looked at Grant. "You had the floor for years, Senator. You lied, you stole, and you silenced others. But not in this courtroom. Not with me." And for a moment, the room was completely silent. Not because it was empty, but because everyone was holding their breath. Cameras were still rolling. News anchors whispered updates into their microphones. Outside the courthouse, crowds had gathered. People held signs. Phones were out. Everyone was watching. Because now, it wasn't just a trial. It was a national moment. Inside, Senator Grant looked pale. He tried to appear calm, but his hands were shaking under the table. Detective Lorna Banks held up a USB drive. "This contains conversations between Senator Grant and 2 corrupt officials. They talk about hiding evidence, changing reports, paying off witnesses." She handed it to the clerk. The judge looked straight at Grant. He looked away, but the real shock hadn't even come yet. Detective Banks looked at the courtroom and said, "There's one more person involved in this cover-up, and you all know her." She turned her head and pointed at Grant's lead attorney. Gasps echoed through the room. "Objection!" the lawyer shouted, but Judge Amara stayed calm. "Let her finish," the detective continued. "This attorney, Miss Halbrook, worked with Grant before the case even started. She helped create fake alibis. She even offered money to one of the witnesses to disappear." Judge Amara looked at the clerk. "Please detain Miss Halbrook until further notice." Security moved quickly. Miss Halbrook stood up, shouting, "This Is nonsense. I'm being framed. But no one believed her anymore. Not after everything they'd just seen. Senator Grant now looked alone. His power gone. His team falling apart. And worse, it was all being broadcasted live. At that moment, a young girl named Maya watched the trial from her living room with her grandmother. Maya was 10 years old, black, and wanted to become a lawyer. She looked up at Judge Amara on the screen. "Grandma, that's what I want to be, just like her." Her grandmother smiled with teary eyes. "She's not just a judge, baby. She's a warrior in a robe." Back in the courtroom, Judge Amara closed her file slowly. She looked at Senator Grant. "Do you have anything to say before I move forward?" Grant stood up. His voice cracked. This trial was unfair. He looked directly at the camera now, trying to speak to the public. This is a political attack, a setup, but no one was buying it. Judge Amara's voice was calm and direct. "Senator Grant, you once said I didn't understand justice." Eo paused. "Well now, justice is looking you straight in the eye." Outside the courthouse, reporters broke the news. Breaking: Senator Grant exposed in court for deep corruption. His lawyer also accused of criminal cover-up. Judge Amara: Fields is being praised nationwide for handling the case with strength, calm, and power. Back in court, Amara made her next move. She called for a special session to review the charges against Grant and to submit evidence to federal investigators. But before she ended the session, she said something no one expected. I was silent. For too long. Many of us were. She looked into the crowd. But that silence ends today. Then she turned to Grant one last time. "You insulted not just me, but every woman, every person of color, and every voice you thought wouldn't. Speak back." Outside the courthouse, the world had already changed. Social media was full of clips from Judge Amara's speech. News headlines called her brave, a hero, a symbol of justice. But inside the court building, something even bigger was about to happen. Because what no one knew. There was still one file left unopened. Judge Amara returned to her chambers after the hearing. Her assistant Elijah followed quickly behind her, holding a brown envelope. "It came by private courier," he said. "No name, no address. Just this." He handed it to her carefully. Amara looked at it. The envelope had a seal from 20 years ago, a case long buried. She slowly opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten letter. She plugged the flash drive into her secure laptop. Video loaded. The title: Senator Grant, 2005 interview, never released. Amara pressed play. There was a young version of Grant sitting in a private room, talking freely, too freely. "I control people. You get dirt on them, and you own them. Judges, reporters, even cops. Especially the weak ones," he laughed in the video. "You scare them just enough, they'll hand you anything." Amara's hand clenched into a fist. She remembered that year, 2005. That was the year her mentor, Judge Nathan Bell, suddenly resigned without warning. Everyone thought he was sick. But maybe he was pushed out. She opened the letter next. It read, "Dear Judge Fields, you don't know me, but I worked in Senator Grant's office. I kept this hidden for years out of fear. But I saw what he did to people, especially your mentor, Judge Bell. He threatened to destroy his family. Grant made him walk away from justice. I hope this gives you the truth you've always deserved." Amara closed the file. Tears formed in her eyes, but her face stayed strong. That evening, she walked back into the courtroom. Only a few people remained: security, her clerk, and a few press. But her voice was firm. "I am reopening the Bell case from 2005. Her clerk looked shocked. "But that's sealed." Amara stared straight ahead. "It won't be anymore." The next day, headlines exploded again. Judge Amara finds secret tape, links Senator Grant to older crimes. Judge Bell's 2005 exit now under federal investigation. The pressure on Grant grew heavier. And then, something unexpected happened. Judge Bell himself showed up at the courthouse, older now, gray hair, slower steps. But when he saw Amara, he smiled. "You found it, didn't you?" he said softly. She nodded. "I always wondered why you left," she said. He took a long breath. "I had a wife, 2 daughters. Grant said he'd destroy them, so I left the bench to protect them." Amara's voice shook. "You didn't deserve that." Judge Bell placed a hand on her shoulder. "But you've done what I never could. You stood your ground. You faced him. And now, you're giving justice back to all of us." In the hallway, cameras waited. But Amara didn't speak to the press. Not yet. She had one more move to make. That night, she met quietly with federal agents. She handed over the flash drive and letter. "I believe you'll find everything you need," she said. One of the agents replied, "If this is what we think it is, Senator Grant won't just lose his seat. He'll lose everything." Meanwhile, inside a dark office, Grant sat alone. He watched the same video. He read the same letter. His eyes were wide. "This can't be real," he whispered. But it was. And he knew. His time was running out. Narrator, voiceover. For years, he buried the truth. Now, that truth is coming back to bury him. Judge Amara looked at the night sky from her office window. The city lights glowed, but her heart wasn't calm. There was still one final step left, and she would take it. Not just for herself, but for every name Grant ever tried to silence. The city woke up to sirens, but these weren't just any sirens. They were for someone powerful, someone untouchable. Until now. At exactly 6:02 a.m., federal agents surrounded Senator Grant's mansion in the hills. Black SUVs blocked both ends of the street. Armed officers moved with purpose. Inside the house, Grant stood in his silk robe, staring at his TV. His name was on every news channel. Breaking: Senator Grant under criminal investigation. Secret evidence connects Grant to judicial corruption. He dropped the remote, knock knock, then a louder bang. "Senator Grant, this is the FBI. Open the door now." He tried to grab his phone. He wanted to call his lawyer, but he knew. It was already too late. The agent stormed in, reading him his rights. "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and federal bribery charges. You have the right to remain silent." Grant didn't speak. For once in his life, he had nothing left to say. They placed handcuffs on his wrists. Flashbulbs exploded outside. Reporters screamed his name. The man who once mocked a black judge in court was now headed to jail. Back at the courthouse, Judge Amara Fields stood by her window. She saw the TV screen from across the hall. Her face didn't smile. It didn't need to. Her silence was stronger than 100 cheers. Elijah, her assistant, entered the room with a tearful grin. "You did it, Judge." She turned slowly. "No, we did it." Later that afternoon, she walked into the main courtroom, but this time it wasn't to judge a case. It was to speak. The room was full. Reporters, law students, old judges, even Judge Bell. She stood at the podium. Her voice was calm, steady, powerful. When someone in power abuses the justice system, they don't just hurt one person. They hurt every citizen who believes in the law. But justice is not blind. Justice remembers. And justice always comes, sometimes slow, but always sure. The courtroom erupted into applause. Even Judge Bell stood to clap. Tears ran down his face. He wasn't the only one. Outside, people were marching, not in anger, but in celebration. Signs read, "Justice for Bell." Amara changed the game. One judge, one voice, one victory. Meanwhile, in jail, Grant sat in a cold gray cell. His phone call went unanswered. His lawyers had dropped him. His supporters had vanished. He stared at the wall in silence, replaying one moment in his mind. What does someone like you know about justice? The words he once threw at Judge Amara. Now those words haunted him, because now he knew exactly what she knew, and it was more than he could ever imagine. In the final press conference, one reporter asked Judge Amara, "What gave You the strength to stand up to someone like Senator Grant? She paused, then said, He tried to silence people like me my whole life. But I didn't fight him alone. I carried every voice he tried to break. I stood up because it was time we all stood up. As the cameras turned off, Elijah whispered, You changed the nation. She shook her head gently. No, I just reminded Dries who we really are. The courtroom was quiet now. The trial was over. The headlines had faded. But Judge Amara Fields knew the real work was just beginning. Months had passed since Senator Grant's arrest. The city felt different. People walked with a new confidence, a new respect for the law, because justice had been more than words. It had been action. Judge Amara sat at her desk, reading letters from people all over the country, from small towns and big cities, from young students and old veterans. They wrote to thank her, to say she gave them hope. One letter stood out. It was from a young girl named Maya. She wrote, Dear Judge Fields, I want to be a judge one day. I want to be strong like you. Thank you for standing up when no one else would. Amara smiled and kept the letter close. Outside in the courthouse lobby, a new statue had been unveiled. It was a statue of Lady Justice. But this time, Lady Justice was different. Her eyes were open, her scales balanced not just by law, but by courage and truth. Judge Amara was invited to speak at schools and events. She told her story simply. Justice is not just about laws. It's about people. It's about standing up when it's hard. It's about believing in what is right, even when others doubt you. Back in her chambers, Judge Bell visited. He had returned to work as a judge, but now he worked alongside Amara as a mentor. You changed the way we see justice, he told her one afternoon. You gave us a new dawn. Amara nodded quietly. Her assistant, Elijah, reminded her of one thing. Senator Grant's case showed the power of truth, Amara agreed, and the power of one person to make a difference. That evening, Amara looked out over the city. She saw the lights shining brightly, not just from buildings, but from the hope in people's hearts. She thought about the journey, about the insults, the struggle, the pain, and about how every step had led here. Because justice isn't just a word in a book, it's a promise to every person who feels unheard, unseen, or disrespected, a promise that someone will always stand up, no matter how hard, no matter how loud the insults, and Judge Amara Fields had kept that promise.